So this will be a water pump, timing belt, and tensioner. The whole timing belt kit video. I did not realize until part of the way through that I would be replacing all three. In the previous two videos, kind of went over discovering why. Initially, I was replacing the O-ring on this coolant pipe here because I was having a leak. That did not fix it. One of the video about that will explain why it didn't fix it, and then why I decided to go ahead and replace the water pump. But then in the previous video, which I will link in the description for you, where I started to replace the water pump, I found some other issues, which is why I decided to go ahead and just do the whole timing belt kit with not only the pump, the belt, but also the tensioner. So if you want to see why, link in the description to the previous video. But this one will be water pump, timing belt, and tensioner install video.
So to get this thing out, you got to take the timing cover off, to get the timing belt off, to get the water pump out. So you got to take your wheel off, take your crankshaft pulley there off, and then you got two belt tensioners and two belts to remove. Right here you can see my completely failed struts. Both sides are like that. Plus on this side we got this, so that needs addressed. And there's that stuff out of the way, so now I can start to unbolt the timing cover there. It comes out in 2 or 3 pieces if I remember correctly. Anyways, I'm gonna get all these timing cover pieces off of here and we can get up in there. Yeah, that was fun. That back top left cover was always a pain to get in and out because there's crap in the way, and yeah, I just broke the damn thing finally getting it out. I was like, oh, I got it, and now I see why it came out. Didn't break it the first time, but you know, it's supposed to go easier the second time around, but that tells you how much of a pain in the ass it is to get that top left cover off. Right there's a little mark. I got it highlighted from the last time. It'll line up with that notch there. You can see it's a little past. More on that in a second. This one's harder to show, so I'm not going to worry about it, but it's the same deal back here. You got a little notch in the cam gear and a little notch there on the edge of the valve cover gasket where it lines up. So as I said, you can see I'm a little past there. I went just a little too far. And then down here, the mark, it's real hard to see, especially since it's rusted and whatnot, but there's a little divot right there, right on the tip of my fingernail, right past this pin. Okay, and this is difficult to show from here. It's supposed to line up. Where are we at? I gotta see that you guys can see. Anyways, it's supposed to line up with that mark back in there, so I'll change the video settings so you can see it better. And you can see it's just a little bit past as well, and that's because we went just a hair too far. But that's just a hair past, and those cam gears up there are just a hair past. So if I didn't go just a hair past, they would all be lining up. So to turn it over to get the marks to line up, you just have to temporarily, very lightly reinstall the crank pulley, the harmonic balancer, and then you can turn it over that way. Alright, so to get this water pump out, we got to take the timing belt off. Now if you weren't replacing it, or kind of even if you are, you still want to mark this, so you want to line that up just like I have it and how I explained just a few minutes ago. And what I like to do is mark the belt too, because you can run into a scenario where you put it back on, and even though you got it back on, and even though this cam didn't move, and even though that cam didn't move, and even though the crank down there didn't move, if you can still be a tooth off when you put the belt back on. I actually had it happen on a Honda Odyssey I was working on, but because I marked the belt, I was able to catch that happened, and then usually you just have to stretch it tighter. It'll be almost impossible at times, and you might have to wiggle things. You know, the cam gear is just a millimeter, the crank gear down there just a millimeter to get it. But usually if you miss a tooth when you put the belt back on, it's because you didn't pull it quite tight enough. So it can be difficult to get it lined back up right. So that's why it's imperative. Mark the belt too, and make sure your belt marks line back up with your other marks when you put it back on. And if you're replacing the belt, you're going to count the teeth. You're going to do the same thing, mark it still, even if you're replacing it. That way you can count the teeth in between the two marks and make sure your new belt, you got the same amount of teeth between each mark, and get those marked, and then you'll mark the new belt. You mark the new belt going by the count of teeth between the marks on your old belt, and you'll still need to line it up the same way. So to remove this thing, basically we're going to have to remove this freaking tensioner. So just take these two bolts out, pop her off of there, and then you'll be able to slide your belt off after you mark everything. And I like to mark it down here too. So I have a mark on each cam gear up there across the belt, and then I'll mark it down here too, like I said, for the purposes of either lining the old one back up or the new one up as well. Oh man, you know what's fun? I gotta take this motor mount out to do the timing belt. If I was just doing the tensioner, no, but you can't get the timing belt off this cam gear right here. See, it's got a little piece that kind of, well, it's too dark. It's got a little piece that runs under in there, and yeah, and if you like, I already moved this cam gear by hand on accident and I had to put it back. So if you pull on this very hard at all, trying to force it through there, which I don't even think you can do, you're gonna move your cam gear and it's gonna be all screwed up. So yeah, we gotta take this dang motor mount out to get this timing belt out, which means this alternator needs to come off, because this is like a two-piece. So this is the top half right here, but the bottom half of it is what's in the way down there, keeping you from getting the belt off. So it's this whole piece right here, which means you got to take the alternator off. Those are the top half out, so now you can get a better look as to why you can't get that belt out without removing that. Not to mention, I think you won't be able to get all these mounting bolts for that water pump down in there without taking it out also. Oh man, that was stupid. Jesus. So to get this thing out, I had to raise it as high as I could, and you could feel it stop on something, and to the point of almost crushing the oil pan. So you can get this topmost bolt out that's down in there, and then this line was in the way, so I also had to unbolt it. Thank God for impact guns, because that thing's so rusty, probably would have broke off. And then you still got to like pry up on that line to get that top bolt out. Then you drop it down as far as it can go, and you can get 2 or 3 of the 3 or 4 bolts on the bottom out, except for this one still hitting the frame, even though you drop the motor as far as it'll go. And then you still have, god damn, then you still have this bolt here bolted into the side of that, but you can't get to this bolt without taking the alternator out, and you can't get the alternator out without taking this out, and then you can't get to the bolt there to take that out without unbolting your oil dipstick there, so you can move it around, and then finally get to that bolt. And now you can see that one's still in there, but now I can get it out because I can wiggle it around high enough to pull this thing out. Oh, also to drop it down far enough to get those bolts out. Then where am I at here? Stupid power steering pump pulley hits right there, so you can only lower it so far without taking the power steering pump off, which is why you can't get that last bolt out there. And that was a nightmare just to get it shut. It wouldn't come out here, it wouldn't come out there. I had to shove it in there to finally get it out. Now I can pull this freaking mount out and then finally get to the water pump.
Also on the back left side there towards that strut tower, there was a coupler I had to unplug because it was smashing into the side of it.
Alright, there's the belt. So now I can finally unbolt this water pump. And there's that. It was a waterfall of like 10 different streams. Pretty impossible to catch it. I mean, well, if you place your jack right, maybe. So I'll put in a few real quick, getting her all back together steps and whatnot, you know, mainly like lining up the new timing belt. Like how I said, you got to be careful with that and match up your markings and count the teeth and all that. Get her back together and make sure she doesn't leak anymore. Alright, so here's the old putting it back together part. So I went ahead and cleaned up mating surfaces down there best I could for the water pump there. Scraped it off, gasket scraper, and brake parts cleaner on a rag, so it's all cleaned up as good as it's gonna get. I used petroleum jelly like I said, and this slips in real easy now, in and out several times, so it's gonna go in real easy now for sure. I'm gonna go ahead and run that through from the other side, get it bolted down on there. That way I'll just pop on the water pump and bolt it down. Now I already had that water pipe out in one of the previous videos, like I said, trying to fix the O-ring. So you should not have to worry about that. Yours should still be in place. Like so. Also, you won't have to pop it over if you buy just the water pump and not the housing with it. So, because mine came with this housing here, it's already bolted down to it. I'll recheck the torque on that once I get it installed. So I just got the 3 bolts on each side. It already has the gasket installed in between the pump and the housing there. And I need to pull the gaskets out for this rear surface of the housing that goes on there. So there's a new water pump bolted to the block, 17 foot-pounds of torque. Could not find a spec on these little ones, so just made sure they were snug, but you don't want to over tighten them in that aluminum housing there or they will strip out. So with that installed, now I'm ready to get the new timing belt on here, which is a good time to inspect and or replace your idler pulley there, and then of course your tensioner pulley. These do have bearings in them that wear out and then they'll flop around and you'll lose tension. So it's usually not a big deal on the first timing belt change, but by the second timing belt change, you know, per the owner's manual, service schedule, whatnot, you definitely probably just want to go ahead and replace the idler pulley and tensioner.
Tensioner pulley, I mean, but you want to replace the belt tensioner every time.
Just as preventative maintenance. Alright, so this is the part where I was talking about lining up the marks on your new belt in relation to where you marked it on the old one. And counting the teeth, okay? So if you marked it in between the teeth, damn, this thing will not focus. If you marked it in between the teeth like that, then that's the spaces you're gonna have to count. So that's how I did it. And the reason you want to count the spaces and then transfer the mark to the new one is because if your old belt is stretched, if you just go by distance, it's going to be off. So you want to count either the teeth if you marked a tooth or the spaces if you mark the spaces, and then retransfer your marks to the new belt. And the same thing on the bottom where it should have been marked down here like this, whether it is a space or a tooth, transfer it to your new belt. And then, as I said, you're gonna have to get them lined up. Up here it'll be the marks on here, which I went ahead and marked the cam gears as well, but they have their own notch, as we discussed earlier, to line up with your mark. And then this thing had its own way to line it up, which I just showed earlier, but I just went ahead and marked it down here to get that mark lined up. So you got to make sure you got to transfer the marks over to the new belt and get those marks lined up. Like I said, the first time I did this on an Odyssey, I just when I initially threw it on there, it didn't line up, and it's because you'd be surprised how tight you got to stretch it. Sometimes you got to move these cam gears a millimeter or two, same thing with your crank, to get it to line up. It's very easy to get it off one tooth if you don't transfer your marks to the new belt like that.
Be sure to mark the bottom down by the crank too, because you can get the two cam gear marks lined up and then still get the bottom one off.
Okay, there's the new timing belt. You can see all the scribble marks. I messed up a few times. That's why you always want to double and quadruple check this. What I do the first time, I looked at the wrong mark on accident when I was counting out the spaces, marks on it from the previous time. I had it tore down. If you didn't see the previous videos, from the first time I replaced the tensioner. So then the second mistake I made was I counted a space after the mark, and then the second time in transferring it, I counted including that space, so I was off by one. So that's why you got to be real careful, and, you know, just like I said, triple check, quadruple check, make sure you get it right. It's imperative. So that's the correct mark there. On the third try, I made sure I finally got it right. There's the mark on the cam gear, so it's lined up there. And then when I came down here, she wasn't wanting to line up for me there. I didn't have enough slack to get it lined up there. You can see there's a B I wrote for bottom. It's lined up now, but I couldn't get it at first, so what I had to do, as I said earlier, you might have to move some of these some. I had to turn this cam gear by hand just like a few millimeters forward. That way I got enough slack to get my bottom line lined up, okay? And you got to be careful with these. Sometimes they can be sitting where they're just ready to snap forward, you know, a good 45, 90 degrees one way or the other. And then it'll be kind of a pain to get them back. So only move it just the very smallest amount you need. I've had them where they'll shoot back or forth 30, 40, 50 degrees or more. Then you got to get them back, and that's kind of a nightmare. So that's the last thing you want to happen. Plus, you know, you could break a finger or something that way. So I turned it just a few millimeters to get it lined up, and then I couldn't get this one lined up by one tooth, so then I had to grab it and turn it back a few millimeters, give myself slack around this water pump here and get it lined up. That one's a pain to show you because of all the crap down in there. Well, you guys can kind of see it there, but both top are lined up, my bottom's lined up as I just showed you. So now I got to get this new tensioner on here. After we get that installed, we'll check again to make sure that we didn't slip a tooth or anything when installing the tensioner. There's the new tensioner tightened down. I just rechecked all my marks. They're still lining up. So now I'm ready to pull this pin out so the piston will shoot forward just like I showed on the last one. Good quick heavy yank on this or it'll get stuck. And she's done there. And as you can see there, if you didn't skip through the video, it's already out further. It was slowly coming out on its own, and I just kind of like wiggled around on this and it came out. So it's still going to come out more while it runs because it's going to be like bouncing around and whatnot, and so this will come out more. But you can see it's already out further than that old one the way it was sitting. We know it gets tighter as soon as the assembly starts to turn, but just sitting here, it's already a good, even though it's slightly loose because it hasn't revolved yet, it hasn't turned yet, it's still way tighter than that old one I just pulled off where I had all kinds of play just flopping around. Forgot to mention earlier, but you got to be careful with your crank sensor here, and it does route in between the belt there like so. But now I just got to put all this crap back together. Get the alternator back in, tighten down both pieces of the motor mount back in, tighten down both serpentine belts and their respective tensioners, the timing belt cover, the intake system here, distributor and water pipe on the other side. Well, that stuff's just because I tore apart the other side first, checking that water pipe O-ring for the leak before this thing turned into a whole timing belt and water pump job. But if you missed it, check out the previous videos. I pulled all that apart to pull that water pipe out to check the O-ring. I just replaced it once already and it did not fix the leak. I think I explained all this in the beginning of the video, but I'm gonna work on getting all this crap back together, and then go over the burping procedure, filling this thing back up with coolant. When you lose that much coolant, taking that water pump and whatnot off, you're gonna have to fill it. You're missing a lot, but you got to kind of burp the system. You're just gonna have a lot of air in the system, and if you get an air pocket in there, it's gonna overheat on you. Yay, done. Now I just got to drop this thing back on the ground and get her filled up with coolant. Alright, excuse the gardening, but you can see I got the front end lifted up there. That's to help aid in getting the coolant back into the block, down into the water pump. You don't want that brand new water pump running dry or you can burn it up. I'm going to fill the radiator and it'll run down this pipe in here and hopefully back to the water pump. I've been adding coolant for quite a while now, over half a gallon. Poured it in nice and slow. It may look like the radiator's full, but it's not because it just keeps trickling down in there. Okay, got the whole gallon in now and it keeps going, so we need to add more. I have had a few bubbles start to come out, and that's just part of the burping process. Let it set for a minute while I mixed up some more antifreeze because I have a concentrate and it went down, so some more bubbles probably came up. That's good. It's exactly what we want. Alright, took about a gallon and a half. I got my reservoir full, so now we're going to start it and let it run, and as it runs and heats up, you should start seeing bubbles come out of here. That's the burping process to get the air out of this thing. Alright, here goes first start. Hope it doesn't blow up. We got, how's the battery dead? Oh, I lied. It's a little low, 12.3, but it should still at least try to turn over with that, if not turn over, but my positive was loose. So, now let's see if it'll blow up. Sounds good. Oh, what was that? Seen some bubbles come out already, so I don't know why I just stumbled there. It probably was an air pocket in the fuel line because it's been sitting for a while, because I've been finding more crap and waiting on parts or whatever, so it probably had some air in the fuel line. But now I just gotta wait on it to heat up, let all the air bubbles come out, keep an eye on the temp gauge, make sure it doesn't overheat. Might take a few tries, and then usually I'll run it down the road and back real close to the house in case it overheats. Let it cool down, and once it cools off, check it and top it all off again. But it's imperative, I gotta get all the air out of the system, so we just gotta take our time burping it like this. It'll go down. I gotta watch the temp, make sure it doesn't overheat, keep topping it off and whatnot. And if it gets too hot, I'll shut it off. And a lot of times when you shut it off, it'll burp some out, and then sometimes I go under the hood and hold the throttle some, and you keep the revs up, then it'll start shooting bubbles and cooling out, and it will make a mess, but you gotta get them air bubbles out.
So that's a complete process. Got her back together. Finally, no more leaks, so I'm stoked about that. So she should be good to go now, so now I can start addressing a few of the other issues that still need tackled here, working on getting new tires and whatnot. And I got to get this front struts replaced, and then we can start doing some rip videos in it. But thanks for watching, guys, especially if you made it clear to the end here. You're awesome. Hope to see you on the next one.